that my father has received from his own father, but then he started buying the different vineyards from the rest of the family, so gathering the patrimony. 6 different vineyards, 5 of them here in the Baixo Cargo region, and 1 in the Cima Cargo region. And today we are going to see a little bit the production. I'm just going to ask you to have a little bit more careful because we are in the timing of the organized chaos. Harvest time is the busiest time in the Douro region. It's also one of the best times to see everything happening, but we have to be careful with all the machinery going on. So here, one of the things I was talking about schist, and in this wall we are able to see how is our soil beneath our vineyards. Everything about schist. You have vertical plates of schist that will make it difficult to vinify here, yes, and to plant here, but will also give different properties to our wines. The so well-known minerality that we have in our wines. Also the traditional way. Here in the Douro region you have 2 kind of landscapes, the patamars, terraces, that were from the post-phylloxera period, and then we also have the planting along the hill. That was really the traditional way before phylloxera. We have realized that here in the Douro one of the main problems is the erosion of the soil. So when the major rain comes, if the patamars are not well built, and as you can see by the landscape, it's not easy to build here a correct patamar, then you will have a lot of erosion. So planting like this, you are going to be able to have more density of plantation. My youngest brother, Tiago, our winemaker, with a lot of wine in his mask.
It's a winemaker's mask, so not only the hands get tainted, basically. So, well, wonderful to meet you, and welcome again.
Hi.
And how are you?
I'm
Good
fine.
To see you. How's everything?
I promise
Yes,
he's
yeah,
here.
yeah.
So we were talking about the density of plantation that also allows you to preserve from the erosion of the soils and having more density of plantation.
As Patricia was saying, the high density of planting makes a huge difference in terms of the way it can adapt to our climate, basically. So that was actually one of the reasons we decided also to recover this tradition, inspired again by what our great grandparents were already doing, and very, very well, basically. And so with this high density of planting, as you can imagine, there's a huge. Já falaste do que é que é adaptado à seca, é isso?
Não, ainda não tinha chegado aí, estava a falar da erosão, que ajudava a prevenir a erosão dos solos.
Okay, so basically, well, as we have such a high density of planting, naturally there's a huge competition for everything, for water, nutrients, and even for the physical space, which means that the plant will always be much more compact. For example, our colleagues from Vinho Verde always says that they look more like a bonsai than a grapevine. But actually, this works really well for our conditions because basically, as they don't develop so much leaves, so much vegetation, it means that actually they don't need so much water to survive. And the losses of water per transpiration of the plant will be actually much smaller. At the same time, as there's such a strong colonization of the soil, well, there's always like a shadow effect over the soil. So basically, there's no the sun is not heating the soil. So we're also reducing the losses per evaporation from the soil. So basically, we're limiting the little water that we have available. Basically, we're making sure that the vines will use it more wisely and more efficiently. So this is actually something that is very, very important for us, and I think that for everybody, because, well, we're always talking about carbon footprint, and of course it's so important, but we have also to think about our water footprint as well. And we know that irrigation, for example, does require a lot of water. So we knowing also that water, will have to be available for animal and human consumption, and for other cultures that do have to rely on water, basically availability. So we have to give the vineyards the proper tools so that they can indeed adapt, because it's true that vines have an extraordinary ability to adapt to extreme conditions. But if we start irrigating since the beginning. It's true that we do create a kind of like an addiction also because well the roots won't develop in depth. All the plant physiology will also adapt to have well water easily available. So in this case, we're actually just making sure that they're properly adapted to our natural conditions basically, and so that works really really well. And another dimension that made us also recover this new world vineyard system basically, it's basically well also the mixed planting. So when you look to the vineyard and you see all these different colors, you can see that there's actually well different varieties basically planted together. So you know that well before we used to have our famous field blends in the vineyards that had 80 years or 100 years, and again nobody's doing that anymore, and it's a pity because we know that this kind of vineyards do have such a great character and such a great identity that it's crucial that we keep basically not only preserving the old vines but also that the new plantings also integrate these same ideas, because otherwise at some point we would lose this character basically. So by having this huge diversity of indigenous varieties, for example here we have 15 different grape varieties planted together in only 1.5 hectares
50.
basically. 15
What?
15
15,
15
okay.
15. Yes, well, our ancestors sometimes were even more ambitious and went a little bit wilder indeed. But even so, 15 is
Yeah.
quite a few even so.
How
So
many hectares do you have in total here?
in Gaivosa? So Gaivosa, it's about 20 hectares basically. So, but next to it we have Val de Raposa, the sister vineyard, which is another 20. So, so here we have roughly around 40 hectares under vines in this part. But within the 6 quintas of the family, it's 140 hectares
Okay, great.
under vines. But for example, we don't buy any grapes, neither wine, so it's all coming from the family's own vineyard. So that was always something that since the beginning we decided to do. It's crucial to be working in the vineyards to really to understand its full potential and try to express that in the different wines that we make. So well, this mixed planting tradition was actually started with a more intensity basically in the end of the 19th century. So after the famous or the infamous American plagues basically. So oidium, well, or downy mildium, powdery mildium, and then phylloxera. So especially after phylloxera, our ancestors thought, okay, so we have to make sure that another plague or not, we don't have another plague or another disease destroying again all the vineyards basically. So as we had so many different grape varieties indigenous, so in Douro we have something like 120 roughly, so 70 reds and 50 whites. So they thought that, okay, so if we plant different varieties together, well, who knows if one is affected by some of this disease or plague, eventually the others can still survive. So that was not only a very, very wise idea, but at the same time, it's really, really fantastic to see the consistency that we get in this vineyard in terms of production. So for example, if one year one produces a little bit more, the other may produce a little bit less. If one year one performs a little bit better, the other one not so much. But the overall quantity and quality is quite consistent, but with a really, really nice fingerprint of the vintage.
In this case, profile may vary.
And in this case, profile may have a little change indeed,
Just
but
little.
again, well, you feel the influence of the vintage, which is actually great. I think that it's one of the things that we love also about wines is how they can indeed express in different years. So it's nice to see that little, well, that fingerprint of the vintage is indeed very significant. But at the same time, the overall quality, it's very consistent because we know, for example, if we compare it with other regions, there are vintages that are extraordinary for Cabernet, for example, and eventually the next one, not so much. So in this case, it's like the overall quality is always like adjusted with those variations of one and the other. for the future, basically.
How many varieties do you have in a vineyard?
Altogether, between the old ones and the new, we have about 60 different varieties, and all indigenous varieties.
But you, of course,
But that's not too much because as there's 120, so there's still a long way to go.
this like field blends. You harvest and vinify together all the grapes.
That's
all the varieties.
A good question, and actually, well, as you know, in the mixed plantings, in the original field blends, many times we will do that indeed, and actually we still do, and I do love also that possibility because, as we know, to co-ferment also different varieties together is different than to ferment it apart and to blend it again. There's a lot of different reactions and interactions that will happen during the fermentation. So. In the original ones, yes, we used to do it. In the new ones, we're already doing it in part, and I say in part because, well, we also want to be able to study also this like minority varieties, basically, or these rare grapes that we're now also replicating again, so that we can also know a little bit more about their individual contribution also, because we know it in a fantastic blend with 20 or 30 different varieties, but individually not so much. So we want to have also that knowledge also about the individual potential. And who knows if in the future we'll also be vinifying it together as before. So it will always be just experimenting and see where we will get indeed the best results and the results that will express the best these different vineyards basically. And we've been actually collaborating with the local university, UTAD, which is one of the most important universities for viticulture and enology here. Actually, in some of our most important old vineyards, like Abandonado, the one that Domingos was referring, not only to identify but also to try to make the connection between genetics and the final quality of the wine. So to understand a little bit more about that as well. So as we know, of course, terroir is very, very important, but of course we know that also the individual, that specific genotype also plays a difference. So we're doing some really interesting studies with them, and within this really interesting vineyards, of course, that there are challenges. So as you can imagine, everything has to be done by hand, or almost everything, and so that's a little bit the reason why most of the growers have decided to stop actually this kind of plantings. But I think that with this kind of vineyards, one of the things that we also want to recover is also the longevity. So something that was kind of lost also in these last plantings, because when you see the vineyards that we were planting 10 years ago or 20 years ago, well, for example, with 20 years, some of those vineyards have already like an old vine behavior in terms of yield, and unfortunately not in terms of like that quality that we usually gain in the real old vineyards. So we want also to recover that. So of course that, as Patricia was saying, basically, as the production per vine is much smaller, basically. So a vine here can produce, like, for example, the total hectare with the 8,000 of plants can actually produce almost the same as an hectare of the terraces, the patamares. But the difference is that here you have 2 or 3 times more plants. So of course that each plant here is producing 2 or 3 times less than in the terraces, and so of course it preserves much better its resources. So it's not such an intensive viticulture, so it can last indeed much longer. Also the training system also allows that as well, which is a double goyot. And so we want to recover again that possibility of having vineyards with 80 years and 100 years, because we have, so far, our generation still has the privilege to work with such vineyards, and we have, I think, also the responsibility to make sure that the next generations will have it. So we definitely have a huge window of opportunity to find also new tools for these vineyards. So it's not like just thinking about the tools that we may have in these next 5-10 years, it's the tools that we'll have also in this next 50, 80, 100 years. And for example, we're already doing experiments with farming drones. So Of course, drones for monitoring are already a reality all over the world, but for farming, it's something quite new, and actually, it's something that actually can solve most of our problems here. So. Our challenge is always the adaptation to the slope, to the terrain. So if we have something airborne, of course that will be extraordinary, and that will solve most of our problems, and it will allow as well a much more precise viticulture. So although we're getting back to a lot of our traditions in terms of viticulture, we also making sure that these new tools that can actually introduce a lot of precision will be also a great addition to our work in the future, basically.
Could you give a little more detail? What would drone do for you?
Well, for example, spraying. Spraying is one of the things that comes right away to our mind, because well, it's one of the most labor-intensive works that we have to do, and we have always many hours of work in terms of that to prevent the natural diseases that we usually have here. And again, if we can do that with a farming drone, and there are already prototypes for that. And so with the evolution of technology, well, that will be a reality not in 100 years, that will be a reality in 10 years.
I'm going to make it work for a little while so that you can see it. So the principle is super simple, but it works really well. For example, now we're here, now we're working with our legs. All at the same time, we could work with it alternate as well if we wished. It's stopping at 5 centimeters, for example. And we can control the pressure and everything. So when I arrive, first thing in the morning, I taste all different wattage, and depending on what they're showing, depending on the quality they have at the moment, which one is, we can create a specific, again, trading program for each one of it, which is a wonderful tool. And
What's it called?
well, it's a mechanical threading machine, so it's a robot. The barrel cellar, which is buried down here with really nice temperature conditions. We'll take a quick look to it before going to taste the wines. So it extends all that way, really good temperature and natural temperature conditions. That was always also one of the concerns, even after building the facilities. We've studied also the behavior in terms of temperature to make sure that, well, we didn't have to create like a specific cooling system for it without having really the experience to see how the building will behave. So actually it didn't need it almost anything. Naturally you have already very good temperature there and very stable over the year. So we just created like a little fan to renew the air, but without any air conditioning or anything. So we can have like 80% natural humidity down there, and even being in a dry region like Douro can be, but it works naturally really well. But we'll see it more in detail down there. To the look, basically. So basically they toast the barrel without fire, which means that basically it avoids that kind of like smoke taint that any toast will have, basically. So really interesting for wines and for rosé that we're also experimenting in these barrels.
So for wine at the end, what does it taste like? Or is it the first time you've used these?
We've been using it already for some years. So you do have the complexity of the barrel aging. So you have those balsamic, spicy notes that you can indeed have, but you don't have so much, again, that kind of like smoky character that which always interferes a little bit with the purity of the fruit. So it's really interesting, and we've been using it more and more. And for example, even Portuguese oak, as you can see over here, Carvalho Português, but in this case, for example, not toasted at all. So parfait, so untoasted, because Portuguese oak, usually when it's toasted, it does require a slightly stronger toast, which will be too much for a white wine. So we're actually testing it without any toast, and it's actually really interesting. But we've been doing a really interesting work with Portuguese oak, and we'll see even better on the main barrel room. So here we have the different wines that are aging here. We have, for example, the white wine that we're releasing from 2015. We have a red one from 2011, for example, which was an iconic vintage in the Douro Valley. So it wasn't easy to get, well, to keep it aging all this time here. But probably that's when we love the most to be a family winery, because we know what it takes. We know that's a huge investment to keep all these wines behind all this time. But at the same time, we see what we gain with that additional time. So it's really a privilege to be able to show a wine that is not only promising quality, but it's already showing a lot of its character. Here, you can see, well, the different wines that the family makes. So it's a quite diverse collection of wines, but also it's a natural reflex also of the diversity that we find in the 6 families' vineyards. So of course we could make only 6 wines, but that wouldn't be as fun as it is basically to make much more, because again, each quinta has then so much diversity with all the different vineyards and with all the different varieties, and we really like to play with that and to show that in the different wines that we make. So dry wines here, Douro wines, and then ports also on this side, as we're really happy, and our deer port tradition is very special to us. So we also have a very complete range of ports already as well. So as you can see, for example, here there's a big concentration of famous vineyards around Pinhão, so in the very center. It's almost like that book, Where's Wally or Where's Waldo? It's hard to tell who's who. But Quinta da Gaivosa is here. So it's on a different location indeed. So we're in the northwestern border of the valley, which naturally brings very different conditions, but that are indeed very special. So being on the northwestern border, the climate is a little bit cooler, so we're closer to the mountain, we're closer to the transition from Vinho Verde to the Douro Valley. So we do have already, of course, the intensity of Douro and the soils of the Douro, but with a little bit more rain, a little bit milder temperature, which really allows us to preserve a lot of balance in the berries and then in the wines. Also, as we are higher in altitude, we're in between 350 and 500 meters of altitude. This also helps making it again cooler. But then, for example, our red grape vineyards are all planted in this slope, so they're all facing west. So you get many hours of sunlight basically. So it's this really interesting combination between cooler conditions, but with lots of sun that create a very special terroir here in Quinta da Gaivosa, that I hope that I'll be able to show you now in the wines that we'll taste.
What's the percentage of still wines and port wines you make?
At this point, Anne, is about 70% Douro wines and 30% port. So it's a little bit different to the tradition, but at the same time, it's true that although we were one of the first, we were part of the first producers that started to make still wines in the Douro Valley, we were also one of the first to come back to our tradition. So and we hope that in the future we'll be like 50-50 actually. So again, we started to make Douro when almost nobody was doing, and we're getting very strongly back to our port traditions, when unfortunately some people are actually slowing down a little bit, but I think that it's a wine that we can never really forget. It's a part of our legacy, it's part of our story, and it's a unique wine that we have indeed to preserve. So we'll taste now the wines, okay? But without the effect of the heat, basically. So you have the house style of